Hi guys, this is Daryl and welcome back to Book Odyssey. Today I'm looking at the controversy that has surrounded Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land since its release in 1961. So I've done a couple of these controversy videos now, and I wanted to tackle Stranger in a Strange Land for a while now because there are some really big ones surrounding this book, which touch on polygamy, religion, cannibalism, and even allegedly has links to notorious killer Charles Manson. But before we get into all of that, I just want to state that firstly, if my reference to cannibalism didn't give it away, this video will deal with adult themes and isn't really for children. And secondly, I'm not making this video to pass judgment on Stranger, which I'm a fan of, nor Heinlein, who I'm also a fan of. I'm simply doing it for the lulz. Stranger in a Strange Land, first published in 1961, tells the story of Michael Valentine Smith, a human who comes to Earth in early adulthood after being born on the planet Mars and raised by a Martian alien race. The story explores his interaction with an eventual transformation of the Terran culture on Earth and is set in a post-Third World War United States where organised religions are politically powerful. There is a world federation of free nations, including the demilitarized US, with a world government supported by special service troops. Prior to World War III, the crewed spacecraft Envoy was launched toward Mars, but all contact is lost shortly before landing. 25 years later, the spacecraft Champion makes contact with the alien inhabitants of Mars and finds a single human survivor, Valentine Michael Smith. Born on the Envoy, he was raised entirely by Martians and is ordered by them to accompany the returning expedition. Heinlein reportedly got the idea for the novel when his wife suggested a new version of The Jungle Book, but with a child raised by Martians instead of wolves. He decided to go further with the idea and worked on the story on and off for more than a decade, believing that contemporary society was not yet ready for it. Stranger in a Strange Land won the 1962 Hugo Award for Best Novel and became the first science fiction novel to enter the New York Times Book Review's Best Sellers list. In 2012, the Library of Congress named it one of the 88 books that shaped America. Originally titled The Heretic, the book was written by Heinlein in part as a considered effort to challenge social customs. In the story, Heinlein uses Smith's social openness to re-evaluate such institutions as religion, money, monogamy, the fear of death, and features concepts such as non-violent cannibalism among the Martian aliens that raised him. Heinlein said that when writing the novel, he knew it would be years before it would be released, because the world wasn't ready for it. He wrote, perhaps referring to the sexual revolution in the 60s, "I had been in no hurry to finish it, as that story could not be published commercially until the public mores changed. I could see them changing and it turned out that I had timed it right." Some of the passages were considered shocking for the time. The publisher initially urged Heinlein to ditch some of the book's more controversial passages, particularly content that touched on sexual or religious themes. Heinlein, however, was unconvinced his story could survive without these elements. The author famously remarked in a letter to longtime friend and literary agent, "If I cut out religion and sex, I'm very much afraid that I will end up with a non-alcoholic martini." Heinlein said his story was supposed to be a completely free-willing look at contemporary human culture from the non-human viewpoint of a man from Mars. No sacred cows of any sort, but in addition to a double dozen of minor satirical slants, the two major things which I'm attacking are the two biggest, fattest sacred cows of all, the two that every writer is supposed to give at least lip service to, the implicit assumptions of our Western culture concerning religion and concerning sex. Summing up his stance, Heinlein proclaimed, "I don't see how to take out the sex and religion. If I do, there isn't any story left." While Heinlein was ultimately permitted to keep the sexual and religious content, he did agree to cut over a quarter, approximately 60,000 words, of his text. The full version was published posthumously in 1991. A central element of the second half of the novel is the religious movement founded by Smith, the Church of All Worlds, an initiatory mystery religion blending elements of paganism and revivalism, with psychic training and instruction in the Martian language. The free love and commune living aspects of the Church of All Worlds led to the book's exclusion from school reading lists across the US. In 1968, Oberon Zell Ravenheart, then known as Tim Zell, and a group of friends founded the Church of All Worlds in real life 7 years after the book was published. The Church of All Worlds is a neo-pagan religious organisation modelled in many ways after the fictional organisation in the novel. The spiritual path includes several ideas from the book, including polyamory, non-mainstream family structures, social libertarianism, water-sharing rituals, and acceptance of the religious path by a single tradition, and the use of several terms such as grok, thou art God, and never thirst. While Heinlein was neither a member nor an open promoter of the church, he wrote to Zell in a letter, "Each reader gets something different out of the book because he himself supplies the answers. If I managed to shake him loose of some prejudice, preconception, or unexamined assumption, that was all I intended to do." The Church of All Worlds still exists today as a recognised religious organisation incorporated in California with membership worldwide, and it remains an active part of the neo-pagan community. The idea that the readers supply the answers themselves was something Heinlein was adamant on. When probed by readers to expand on his presumed solutions for fixing the world, Heinlein had trouble disguising his frustration. On one occasion he expressed his feelings by saying, "It is an invitation to think, not to believe." Further to the novel being removed from school reading lists across the US, after it was rumoured to be associated with the notorious killer and cult leader Charles Manson, it was removed from school libraries as well. The novel remained banned in the US state of Texas schools until 2003. According to an article in the New Republic, Manson's encounter with the writings of Heinlein was a pivotal event in his life. The article states that until then Manson had been a petty criminal and drifter who spent his life in and out of jail. But when he was released in 1967, he was a new figure, a charismatic street preacher who gathered a flock of followers among the hippies in San Francisco. Manson's made-up religion was apparently a cut-and-paste invention that borrowed from many sources. As the New York Times notes, Manson's philosophy was an idiosyncratic mix of Scientology, hippie anti-authoritarianism, Beatles lyrics, the Book of Revelation, and the writings of Hitler. But the sci-fi component was pronounced, according to the article. Stranger in a Strange Land allegedly provided the Manson family with its rituals of water-sharing ceremonies, the terminology grokking, and the promise of transcendence. Manson's followers hoped that, like the hero in Heinlein's novel, they could gain mystical powers. The Manson family, of course, had a twisted definition of love, which they wanted to keep for themselves. For the outside world, they wanted a violent race war, which would end with them ruling over the survivors. Toward that end, the Manson family went on a killing spree in August 1969 that left 9 dead and earned them a notorious place in history. The article writes, "It was hardly an accident that Manson borrowed heavily from both Heinlein and Hubbard," referring to L. Ron Hubbard, sci-fi writer and founder of the Church of Scientology. No two writers better illustrate the tendency of science fiction to generate cults. Hoping to free Heinlein of this tarnish by association, novelist and journalist J. Neil Schulman contacted the incarcerated Manson in 1981 to ask him outright about his relationship with the sci-fi novel. According to Schulman, Manson claimed to have never read Stranger in a Strange Land, which would wholly negate the connection between the novel and his crimes. In 1991, in the LA Times, Schulman wrote, "It's clear that influence of Stranger on Manson is, at best, an open question. At worst, it's another tired attempt to discredit Heinlein, whose writings have been ideologically influential on libertarians such as myself, by the sort of guilt by association used effectively by such honest politicians as Richard Nixon and Joseph Stalin. However, some say there are too many parallels for it to simply be coincidence, including the fact Manson named his third son Valentine Michael Manson, reportedly after Stranger's protagonist, Valentine Michael Smith. More recently, Stranger has come under fire for parts of the novel that some have interpreted as misogynistic. Critics specifically refer to a line of dialogue spoken by the character Jill, a nurse who initially assumes responsibility for Mike's care, and she and Smith are discussing what will become a prominent part of the book: polygamy. The character Jill says, "I was coping with wolves," referring to sexually avaricious men, "when you were still a Mars. 9 times out of 10, if a girl gets raped, it's partly her fault." One critic, Sophie Kleeman, whose article I'll link to in the description along with all sources for this video, wrote, "Spoken by a woman, written by a man," carried the implication that it was her ability to cope which resulted in her not being raped, supposed that self-imposed trouble existed when it came to these things. She said, "You could chalk it up to art, or the correct idea that fiction is fiction for a reason. But Stranger in a Strange Land and other sci-fi novels like it are in some way critiques of the present. They ask readers to wonder how things might be different in the future. The answer here, it seems, is not much." Another reviewer on the platform Goodreads in 2013 wrote, "I understand the book is a product of its time, but the book was sexist to me, especially when Jill busted out this gem. It was really hard for me to ignore statements like that in order to focus on the story." I'll leave a link to this thread, which is a really interesting read and does include many different opinions as to the reasoning behind this line. Some, like the above, label it misogyny, some take an opposing view, while others might perhaps put it down to Heinlein once again not trying to provide answers but simply asking questions. But what do you all think about it? Let me know in the comments. So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Hit the like if you like the video, and if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. We talk about all things books, mostly sci-fi with some fantasy in there too. Until next time guys, happy reading.